The Gulf War. Interview of Rick Sansom. Rick Sansom was born on May 16, 1964, in Chicago, Illinois. He has always had a strong love and pride for his country. He wanted to be a part of the military to show this love for his country and to serve the United States. A few years after graduating college, at the age of 24, Mr. Rick Sansom was called to be in the Gulf War. The Persian Gulf is an arm of the Indian Ocean that divides the Arabian Peninsula from Iran and Central Asia. It is one of the most important parts of the world. It is relatively small, and the countries around the Gulf produce 28% of the world's oil and are home to more than half of its oil reserves.
Hot, hotter, and then hot as Hades. Actually, it's funny. So this is what most people don't realize is it was really hot, but you're in a desert environment, so it drops, it'd be 105 degrees, 110 degrees during the day, and then at night it would, in some areas that we were at, where there was a decent amount of elevation to it, it would get down into the 30s. So you'd have a 70, 80 degree change in temperature in less than 8 hours, and your body can't adjust to that. So the first thing we all had to figure out was, how do you get warm? Because your body can't catch up to how cold it suddenly got. We'd be in areas where, believe it or not, there'd be some puddles from our Lister bags that, is where we carried our water. And in the early morning, a lot of times we went out and did night patrols. And you'd come back and the water that was on the ground would actually have a layer of ice on it. So it actually got really cold at night in some places.
The Gulf War. In the beginning of August 1990, Saddam Hussein, the Iraq leader, ordered the invasion and occupation of Kuwait. Saudi Arabia and Egypt called on the United States and other Western nations to get involved.
Yeah, I think I think it was important, because I think it's our, right or wrong, some people don't think it's our job to police the world, but I do think that we have an obligation as a superpower to help protect countries that can't defend themselves and are unrightly invaded by others. I also think we needed to, send a message to the Middle East, which is definitely, an area that does not agree with our policies. At least send a message that we weren't going to just stand by idly and watch them, an irrational dictator kind of jump in and do whatever he wants without us paying attention.
By the middle of January 1991, Hussein defied the United Nations Security Council, demanded to leave Kuwait. The Persian Gulf War began with a massive U.S.-led air offense known as Operation Desert Storm. After 42 days of constant, continuous attacks by the Allied coalition in the air and on ground, the United States President George H.W. Bush declared a ceasefire on February 28th. By that time, most Iraq forces in Kuwait had either surrendered or fled.
It was my family. They showed up down at a unit that I was in a reserve unit that got called up. That wasn't my training. The unit that I was with, it was in the military. We call it a garrison unit, so it's kind of like a multi-function unit that I came back to. And my family was there. They were celebrating. Everybody was fun, but I didn't realize I had PTSD. So when I got home, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, so when I got home, I actually, for the first 60 days, I couldn't sleep in my bed. I had to sleep on the floor because I wasn't used to sleeping in a bed, and I was uncomfortable emotionally, kind of getting back in. There were times where I wanted to go back because it was hard to kind of have everybody hug you and talk to you and ask you all these questions about the war. And I remember, I don't know if your dad remembers, but we had a national meeting, and I was there, and I pretty much kept leaving and going up to my room because if I could have made a choice, I would have just gone back to Iraq. So it took me about 90 days it probably took me 6 months to kind of get my head back on straight. Well, I think being in the military has shaped me to, I'm associated with things. So I think from the military, I've learned a lot of that. I'd like to think I've learned how to be a better leader than I would have been prior to the military. I think the war, again, it's taught me that, whenever things seem like they're horrible, I always kind of come back to the perspective of, I've seen worse, I've been in a worse situation, and, there's a solution to everything. And, whatever feels like it's dire here at the end of the day is, in the scheme of things, to being on a battlefield, they're not that big of a deal.